I'm just going to give a quick talk today about when a new branch of our family tree sprouted. Now, this dates back to, our understanding of it dates back to about the late 1980s. But it goes back a lot further than that. It relates to my dad and his parents. Now, my dad was born in 1925. We never ever knew our grandfather because our understanding was that he had been killed, we understand, in a train shunting accident or something like that, not long after he was born. Now, he was never brought up as a topic of discussion in our family, and as kids we probably never asked. We just maybe have said something about a granddad and were told that no, he died. So that was what we grew up with for years and years and years. Now, in the late 1980s, my sister was working in a council's office, and while she was there, she had access to funeral records, the cemeteries, where everybody was, all the graves were and everything. So she decided to do a search one day on our grandfather's gravesite because she had heard or thought that he had lived in the area where she was working at the time. So she did a bit of an investigation into his gravesite, and she discovered that our grandfather had actually died several years before my father was born. So my sister, being like a dog with a bone, never lets it go, decided to dig a bit deeper to see what she could find. And what she found out was that my grandmother had 5 children who were Dad's older siblings. And then after those 5, there was another girl, and then there was Dad, and Dad was the youngest one. And as I said, he was born in 1925. Now, what she'd found out was that my dad and his next oldest sibling were both born after our supposed grandfather had died. So she did quite a bit of exploring and talking to people who knew people, and she dug around, and I think she'd tried to broach the subject with my dad, but he was didn't really want to know anything about it. And anyway, she found the gravesite of a gentleman who was actually Dad's father, who had died more recently, like in the 70s or something like that. And what had actually happened was that my nana had these 5 children, the oldest 5. Her husband was then killed in a train accident. And she met another person who she had quite a relationship with. And I believe she was actually even living with him, but not married. And she had 2 children. One of them was Dad, and the other one was his next oldest sibling. Now, from what we understand is that this gentleman who was Dad's father decided he wanted to marry my grandmother. But all of his family were very much against it, because not only did she have his 2 children, she had 5 other children as well. So his family was very much against him getting married to a woman who already had 5 kids, as well as 2 of his. So that relationship broke up. And apparently he went off and got married and had 3 boys. Well, my sister discovered all this talking to people in the area that had known the family and one thing and another. And she found out all this information. So in the end, she said to Dad, "This is what I've found out. Now, are you going to tell me what you know?" So he let it know. He told her that he remembers as a kid that he used to have to go off into this solicitor's office or lawyer's office every week or every fortnight or whatever, and he would pick up an envelope, and he would take it home and give it to his mum. He never knew what was in it, but he just knew that he had to go and pick up this envelope and take it home to his mum. Now, apparently what that was in that envelope was the maintenance that he had been paying for the 2 children that he had sired right up until they were, 18 or whatever it was. And so what my sister decided to do at that stage was to track down the three siblings, the 3 brothers who were born once the father had remarried. So she tracked these 3 boys down. Now, with Dad being the youngest, being born in 25, all the other 3 were born subsequent to that. So after he'd got married again, the father had got married again, so probably in the late 20s, early 30s, he'd had these 3 other sons. Well, my sister contacted one of them, and he was shocked, to say the least, to know that his father had had these 2 children prior to him getting married to their mum and having their 3 boys. And he wanted to see evidence of all of this. So my sister fronted up with all the evidence, and the other sister, Dad's older sister, had been told what was going on, and she'd known also that something happened back then, but never talked about it. And this son, or Dad's half-brother, one of them, decided once he'd seen all the evidence that he wanted to meet Dad. Now, the other brother, who was the oldest, one of the other brothers who was the oldest, didn't even want to know about it. Didn't want to have a bar of the whole situation, didn't want to know about it. And the other one, who was, I think, the youngest, was sort of on the fence a bit about it, but that was okay. So eventually my dad and his half-brother, met up with Dad's older sister. So the 3 of them met up as being Dad being the youngest, then my auntie, which was the next one up from Dad, and met up with the middle son of the later marriage. And they formed the most amazing relationship. Dad and this guy hit it off like you would not believe. And we all eventually met everybody, and it was like we sort of embraced this part of the family, but he was the only one that was keen to recognise Dad and his sister and what had happened previously. So they had a few years of a really great relationship, and they spent a bit of time together. They really did. They had a lot of time spent together. And then sadly in 1992, my dad passed away. Well, his half-brother was devastated. He said all those years that he didn't know he had a brother, and when they'd been connected, they had such a great relationship, and then within a few short years, he'd passed away. But we stayed in touch with him and his wife, and Mum stayed in touch with them. But when we actually first made contact with them, the half-brother of Dad's, had already been suffering from cancer, and it was cancer of the blood, from what I understand, and he went into remission. And over the next sort of couple of years after Dad had passed away, his cancer came back. And his wife reckoned that it was because of what had happened to Dad. He'd got so down and low because he'd lost his brother that he'd sort of basically given up and the cancer came back. Now, how true that is, I don't know. And then ultimately in 95, I think it was, he passed away as well. But I go back to some of the times that we spent with them. And I remember one day it was my daughter's, I think, 21st birthday. and I'd put on a big sort of get together at home, and Dad and his half-brother were standing there talking to each other. And there was similarities in the way that they looked, but they didn't look exactly alike, but there was similarities. But the body language, the way that Dad would stand with his hand in his pocket, and he'd have a beer or something in his hand, and looking at his half-brother was a mirror image of Dad. Their mannerisms were so close. When we would just sit there and laugh at them, because they were just, it was just amazing how close and how similar the mannerisms were of these two men. And of course, by this time, I mean, they were in their 60s and they'd never met prior to that. And it was just amazing. And it was a wonderful period in our lives to see Dad with this brother, and with his sister to see this brother, and the times that they spent together, and it's sad because they'd been deprived of that all of their lives. And it's not like they lived that far away. They were reasonably close in geographic location, that they could have known each other years and years and years beforehand. And it was really sad, but I can just say the one thing is that I think all of us, I know Dad and his brother and his sister, were so pleased to have had that time together, to have been able to recognise that there was a branch of the family that had been uncovered, and they were actually able to enjoy all that time that they had together. And since then, I mean, you know, my mum's passed away, the brother's wife has passed away. What I did do at one stage, I was able to, I knew where the younger brother lived, and I met up with them a couple of times, and so did Mum. And he was very happy to have got to know us, but that was of course after Dad had passed away, so Dad never actually got to meet his younger brother. But we did, Mum did, and the rest of us in the family did. But it was just sad to think that all those years had passed, and that link wasn't even made until right into when they were both in their 60s. And I think it's sad, and because I know back in the 1920s, having children out of wedlock and all this sort of thing was just, it just wasn't done. But it did happen. And my nana wasn't the first one. We've had so many stories. Since Dad's story became knowledge, we realised that there were other members of the family that lived in the same town that we did, who were cousins of Dad's half-brother. And we'd all lived in this small town as just townsfolk. And then to find out that, you know, a chunk of them are actually related was quite bizarre. So, yeah, you never quite know what's in the background there, what's in the cupboard, as they say, what skeletons you've got in your cupboard. But for us, it wasn't a skeleton, it was just a lovely time, a lovely period of time where that family were able to spend time together and get to know each other. Sadly, it didn't last long enough, but at least it happened, and I can just thank God for that. And Dad was just overjoyed to have met his brother. His brother was just loved being part of the family, part of our family. And it's just a bit of a shame that didn't last a lot longer. But anyway, that's the way of life, I guess. That's the hands that we get dished out, and you've just got to deal with them as best way you can. So yeah, that little bit of a story on our emerging branch of our family tree. It was quite interesting. So I hope my little story is has sort of sparked a little bit in you to think that, oh, wonder what goes on and what if there's any sort of secrets in my family. But if you find them, don't be afraid of them. They all happen. Things like that happen for a reason. You can't blame people for keeping secrets back in those days. But you can only blame people now if they become aware of them and they don't let everyone else know that information, or give them the opportunity to know that information. Because I don't feel any shame on my grandmother. I don't feel anything at all. It's just part of what happened. It's just part of history, and it was part of life. And I feel just quite excited because we thought we were quite a sort of boring old standard family. You know, you hear of other people with all these stories, and we never had anything. We were just dead boring, but we weren't dead boring. We had a little branch there that we didn't really know about. So anyway, that's my little story. If you've got any enjoyment out of this, please give me a like, a share, make a comment, and if you'd like to, you can subscribe to my channel. And I've got more little stories coming up. I didn't realise that I had so many funny things that I experienced through my life, so I'll keep telling any stories that I can think of. In the meantime, stay safe everybody, take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, bye-bye.